They got a watchtower there for you in that other little paper, whatever it is. The awake. Awake. Yeah, thank you. The awake. And you say, well, I ain't interested. And they went, you know what? This is what's happening. You have to know this. I say, I'm a Buddhist. Oh, well, that's not of God. That's Satanism. That's something that is outside of the realm of God. Well, have you ever read any Buddhist literature? Have you ever heard the words of Buddha? No, we can't. We can't hear the words of Buddha. Well, how do you know that the words of Buddha are, all this negative? Not of God. How do you know this? Without reading. Well, they told me down at the watchtower place that it was evil. And that's how we're indoctrinated into our lives. We are what we are because our parents were that. Those of us that try to move past what our parents have been, many times get hung up in the same thing after we leave. We just in a mode of rebellion. Then you get folks who they rebel for a few years. They're just trying to get out the house and slough some of that. Somebody telling them what to do for a while, and then they fall back in the line. Somewhere down the line, 10, 15 years, it was a thing that I did. Like cause people now talk about, yeah, I did that black stuff in the '60s, but you got to have meat and potatoes now. It's about the money. I got to pay these bills. It ain't about black people and culture and all that kind of stuff. It's about having some money. So I done did that, been there, done that black thing. But the thing is that how does this tie into what we're talking about? A man having more than one wife. What would be the reason for this? Why would it be beneficial to a woman? Why would it be beneficial to a man? What are the benefits? Because there have to be benefits for the woman and the man. And of course, women say, well, of course, you can see what the benefit is to the man. He got a whole bunch of women. But you don't have to be married to a whole bunch of women to have a whole bunch of women. I know men that have 15, 20 women. That they just nothing but pass them in the day and the night on the phone 24 hours a day in between these 15 women. So you don't need to marry and take responsibility and give responsibility and have somebody in your life that you have to respond to have a bunch of women. That's not what it's about. You see, when the feminist movement started, and it started in France with Alexander Dubois, Les Femmes Homme, or in other words, the rights of women, it started there in his essays, which Margaret Sanger and others picked up. And when technology decoupled sex for women for procreation, they decoupled that with the utilizing of birth control, contraceptives. Women could now move into the realm of men without having to worry so much about having children if they didn't want to, because witchcraft always had abortion. Witches were always synonymous with abortion. What did the little fella and Rob Roy say? He said, she said, I'm pregnant. He said, well, I'm sure there's a crone with a twig somewhere that could root it out. Because it deals with the emotions of being able to decouple sex from procreation. Women had the option now of doing that, decouple sex with procreation, because before that, it was always the constant worry of I'm going to get pregnant. And then it was the constant worry in those days, before the 60s, that, it wasn't like now where if you have a baby that you go ahead and struggle through. No, they married you behind to somebody. People think that the 90s was the most promiscuous period in the last 150 years, 110 years, or whatever, but it wasn't. It was in the 50s. Your mamas and daddies or your grandmas in the 30s and 40s and 50s were the most promiscuous. They had more so-called out of wedlock inception in the 50s than they did in the 90s. The only difference was that they married the girls to the men. They found somebody to marry them. If it wasn't you, it's going to be you, because somebody's going to marry them. And you know what it was? The availability of being able to travel in an automobile and the advent of the drive-in movie. That's what got more women in the 50s supposedly knocked up than anything else. But they married the women to the boys, or some boys, so that they would have the so-called nuclear family situation. But your mothers, you know, my mother was a little bit before the 50s, but some of the young ones, your mothers and fathers were the most promiscuous folks. Now that was by the National Organization of Women, I think, put those statistics out in a book called The Myth of Male Prowess. It was cited in the book of The Myth of Male Prowess, I believe in the book is, dealing with the myth of men controlling things. Of course, that is one of the greater myths, but we'll get into that a little later, because you know the white men are in the midst of doing that controlling thing now, and I think that's why folks are down at Cobo Hall trying to convince Bush through marching that, you know, he shouldn't do what Bush is going to do anyway, because Bush been told to do that. A vehicle of controlling human beings is through their thought process. It is through being able to control the issuance of families, being able to control families. And a powerful family in ancient days was not 2 or 3 people. It consisted of hundreds of people. The geopolitical boundaries that we have now, lines drawn in the sand, saying this country and that country, are only really since 1865, the Berlin Conference. Before that, people were hooked to family groups, and they didn't have any geographical area. Basically, they stayed in certain places, but those places, family could be anywhere. It's just like in Africa now. You have Yoruba who are in Ghana, Yoruba who are in Guinea, Yoruba who are in Nigeria. But the boundaries that cut these people off now today are artificial boundaries that were created by the Berlin Conference. It was the same thing in ancient days. You may have had hundreds and hundreds of people because ancient men were polygamous. A lot of the world is still polygamous. This is a fact. Not just in certain countries, because China was, Africa, of course, all the way up to Alaska, in the North Pole, the Eskimos, Australia, the Indonesian archipelago, the Philippines, the Americas. The world was and still is polygamous. Not just in the human family, but all male mammals are polygamous. It is the nature of man. It's not that they trying and that we are trying to be mean to women or dogs in the sense, you know. It is the nature of the male of the species. You see, men and women perceive intercourse differently. They may tell you one thing, but they thinking something else. Women perceive intercourse as intimacy. Men perceive intercourse as a means of dominion